Oh gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
This is LMDtv, and I'm Fazmina Imamudeen. Joining with us tonight is Nihal Fonseka. Hello, Mr. Fonseka. I warmly welcome you to the show.
Good evening, Fazmina.
Good evening, sir. Would you agree that we are seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel as far as the economic crisis is concerned?
I think the better way to put it is that I am seeing a flickering candle inside the tunnel, but not at the end of it, which is still some way away. Actually, we are in a maze of tunnels, but if we use the light that we see carefully, we might get to the end of it before the light goes out, and without getting lost in the maze. The light we now see is that the government, the institutions, and many people have a much greater realization that as a country, we had to make a big course correction in the political arrangements, economic policies, and even more importantly, the management of the economy. Some baby steps have been taken on several fronts to change course, but actually it is too early to say whether we will fully succeed. However, at the moment, we see several positives. For example, we have been able to get the procurement and distribution of fuel under reasonable control, which has a big cascading effect on several other areas of the economy. Cost-reflecting pricing is in place for some previously heavily subsidized items, such as fuel and power, although which causes hardship to people, it reduces the strain on the economy because of it will reduce the budget deficit. And attempts are being made to restructure some of the big loss-making SOEs, which is also has been a big drain on the economy so far. Now, through engagement with the banks and the exporters, we have also been able to get export proceed conversion somewhat increased in recent times, permitting a bigger allocation for essential imports. I won't go into details, but tomorrow you will hear from the governor of the central bank, who is the spokesman for monetary policy outlook, that there are some positive developments on the macroeconomic outlook as well. So I think, yes, there is a light, but whether we get to the end of the tunnel where there is more light will remain to be seen.
How badly has the negative publicity about Sri Lanka in recent months affected our FDI prospects?
Well, Fazmina, negative publicity actually has been quite bad for business in general, but FDIs are not based just on publicity, whether good or bad. Investors take hard-nosed decisions after careful analysis of the macroeconomic situation, political stability, ease of doing business, corruption perceptions, and the ability to drive a reform agenda, especially in a country like Sri Lanka, to make it a comparatively good investment destination. So I would say the negative publicity has had a serious and immediate impact on business areas such as tourism, and publicity turning positive will change that. But FDIs will need quite a lot more than that, as I mentioned to you earlier.
How crucial is the IMF bailout in the context of efforts to secure bridging finance, sir?
Well, given the state that we are in, I think it is crucial as we have run out of any other option. Anybody who lends money, bridging or otherwise, wants to know how they will get repaid. And the repayment capacity for Sri Lanka will only arise once we have a long-term funding arrangement in place with a reasonable assurance that we will continue the reform measures to sustain that repayment capacity. So to that extent, an IMF arrangement, extended fund facility arrangement, which is under negotiation, will be quite a helpful tool, let me say, to give that confidence to the external lenders. But now that requires a debt restructuring, which is also being addressed today by debt advisors, the government, as well as IMF is also getting involved in it to give us advice on what we need to do. So I think any offer of finance to bridge the budget deficit or balance of payments, and I'm not talking here of like direct trade-related funding in specific areas such as fuel. There may be possibilities of getting some funding for those specific things. We'll need at least IMF staff level agreement to be reached.
Do you expect next month's interim budget to offer some respite to the poor and the marginalized? And if so, in what form?
Well, given the abnormally high inflation in 2022, so far that we have seen, and we are likely to see for the next several months at least, there is the poor and the vulnerable have been really hard hit. There is no doubt about that. And certainly needs to be supported. And I think there will be proposals to that effect in the budget that is to be, or the interim budget that is to be proposed. The challenge, of course, is to target this relief because in our present mechanisms, the targeting has been quite ineffective and the relief has really not gone to the people that really need it, or it has gone to those people plus a lot of others who don't need it. So I think there are some thoughts on how this targeting needs to be done as well. And I think along with that, I think there will be relief measures that are proposed. And I'm sure that any IMF program will also recognize that need because you need to look after the vulnerable people in an economy.
How is the geopolitical landscape and tensions affecting middle to low income countries such as ours?
Well, we are a small country apart from being middle to low income. And we are affected both directly and indirectly. The direct impacts comes from the higher commodity prices that has created competition for essential commodities, including even food, making some of these items relatively unaffordable for the middle and low income countries such as Sri Lanka. I mean, example is, for instance, fertilizer, which is prices are through the roof. And it is almost, even if we had the foreign exchange to import fertilizer, the ability to afford fertilizing our land, I mean, it's going to be quite a challenge to actually use fertilizer. The indirect competition comes from having to balance foreign relations with larger and more powerful countries, since to progress, middle and low income countries, especially small countries like Sri Lanka, need the goodwill of all countries. And it's except in a sort of very few cases where aligning with one strong and big economy might get you a godfather, but that strategy also exposes the country to the risk of having to be subservient and sacrifice its economic sovereignty. So I think we have this challenge which we have to meet. But the positive sign is that there is we are not the only ones who are affected. The whole world is affected, and there are some signs that some of the economic factors like commodity prices, etc., might reduce somewhat in the coming months and maybe in the year. So which might give us some respite. But yes, it is something that we have to keep dealing with.
What are the implications of high local debt and restructuring thereof on the banking system? What red flags, if any, do we need to watch out for?
Oh, everything relating to local debt is a red flag. Because any restructuring of government of Sri Lanka rupee debt, especially any kind of haircuts on capital, will have a very, very serious impact on our banks, our insurance companies, and actually the economy in general. My understanding is that the government is very keen to avoid this. But of course, while trying to reach debt sustainability, which is a prerequisite for any IMF program, the debt advisors, government, and the IMF are in discussions, since the economic recovery to get out of the mess that we are in is predicated on the banking system being strong enough to support that recovery. Because as you know, banks remain the biggest financier of business, the biggest intermediary for financial services, because our capital markets are still not fully developed for that purpose. So there is quite a big dependence on the banking system and even the non-banking financial institution system for the funding necessary for economic growth and recovery. So they need to remain reasonably strong to participate in that recovery. So the way forward, I think, is the discussions currently are focusing on agreeing with the IMF the sustainable levels of debt and the benchmarks going forward, longer term, shorter term benchmarks to maintain debt sustainability. Once those are agreed, the debt advisors will see how that level of debt can be reached and negotiate with the debt holders. The comparative treatment principle will necessarily come into play in those discussions. Obviously, lenders will not like some debt holders to be paid in full, while some others are squeezed to accommodate that full payment. Because it's a zero-sum game. So to get to somewhere, if somebody is getting more, the others have to get less. So it is quite a challenging, it will be quite a challenging discussion that we'll have to have. But at the same time, I think institutional lenders who are especially holders of our foreign ISBs are also, I think, will be pragmatic enough to and be realistic enough to realize that the financial sector has to be able to continue to play a key role in the recovery if their restructured debt is to get settled. Because otherwise, I mean, that restructuring will not be a success. So it is too early to say how these stormy waters will be navigated. We will know more about it after the next round of IMF discussions, which are going to happen later this month. There is an IMF team scheduled to visit Sri Lanka for the next round of discussions. And I think these things will be thrashed out at that meeting. But yes, any restructuring especially haircuts on domestic debt, is something that is possibly going to be a very, very difficult thing to be absorbed by the local financial services.
Could we see the rupee gaining some lost ground following our debt restructuring and inflows from the new sources of finance?
Well, I cannot speculate on that, but the supply and demand always plays a big part in the exchange rate in Sri Lanka. And if the inflows increase, there will be less pressure on the rupee definitely. Actually, already we have seen a narrowing of the gap between the official and the grey market exchange rate. But of course, even if inflows improve, the building up of our reserves will be a gradual process. So we will have to still carefully manage our imports for a while longer and liberalize imports gradually on a prioritized basis. So that, but yes, I think the arrangement for which will help a debt inflow, foreign currency inflow, will certainly have a big part to play in at least stabilizing. I mean, I'm not saying that it is going to bring the rupee back to the levels that it was, but stabilizing, and maybe perhaps some gains may be possible.
What assistance needs to be offered to the SME sector, given the impact of the economic crisis?
Well, I mean, it is very true that the SMEs are in a really difficult situation, other than those that are exporting and who have benefited from the depreciation of the rupee. And yes, they do need help. But exactly what immediately can be done is the choices are very, very limited. But once the debt restructuring and an IMF agreement is in place, we can expect our traditional development partners like the World Bank and the IMF to partner the government and the local banks to provide a support package which will improve access to finance at a reasonable cost. The problem that the SMEs face is that they could not really recover from the hardships of the COVID era before they got hit by this the current economic crisis. They were just about raising their heads when this whole thing, sort of the world around them, collapsed. The banks have recognized this and given some support through moratoriums. But what they can do is also limited, because the bank's own sustainability is at risk, because they are finally have to be strong enough to repay their depositors. So I think the best support that can be given on a longer term is to get inflation and interest rates down. But this is not something that will happen overnight. So in the meantime, SMEs should also focus on getting into and expanding their export reach and find ways and means of staying aloft, because the government is also quite constrained. Government also does not have the fiscal space to provide any too much support. But I'm sure there will be some proposals which because it is important to keep the sector alive, because that is provides a lot of employment and it contributes quite a lot to the GDP. So we can't really allow it to really disappear. But yes, they will have to share in the hardship, but they will need assistance. But exactly how that assistance can be delivered is quite challenging at the moment.
What checks and balances need to be introduced or improved to ensure confidence in the central bank as the regulator and enforcer of financial propriety?
Well, basically, we have to do away with the fiscal dominance of monetary policy, which has been the case all along in the, so many decades, I think, in the central bank. The central bank has been basically monetizing the budget deficit by providing government with money to meet the deficit. So to do this, the central bank independence will need to be enhanced by law. And even more importantly, we need people then in the central bank who are capable and willing to use that independence to deliver on the statutory objectives of the central bank, the main statutory objective being price stability, and the next one being financial system stability. Now, both of which are under serious threat at the moment. So I believe that there will be new legislation that to give that independence to central bank and to prevent it from what is commonly referred to as printing money to support the government's budget deficit. But again, for the situation that we are faced today, it is not something that you can sort of stop like switching off an electric light, because the government also has to continue to function, and the revenue proposals, whatever they are bringing, will take some time to materialize. So it is, but still, I think certainly the central bank has to exercise much greater prudence in, and they should be legally protected from having to support the whims and fancies of government expenditure in the time to come.
What are the 3 key changes, in your opinion, that are needed to take forward the economic recovery process?
In my view, the key changes are, the first one, the government has to manage its fiscal activities and significantly reduce the budget deficit. Now, to do this, on the one hand, the Fiscal Responsibility Act should be given more teeth, and the ability to violate the deficit targets in that act should be severely curtailed, which is not the case today. The act is there, but nobody really pays any attention to it, and nothing happens when the government violates it either. And on the other hand, the central bank should be prevented from monetizing the government fiscal deficit by lending to the government, which I already referred to earlier. That is through the strengthening of the central bank independence. The second one is we need to have a development program agreed to by everyone at the political level that will run for 10 to 15 years. It should cover common areas that are necessary for development, can be things like healthcare, the safety net for the poor, the public expenditure programs, all of that. I would even suggest that this be brought into the Constitution itself by expanding that part of the Constitution which currently deals with state policy, which is there in the Constitution, but unfortunately it is not presently enforceable because there is no repercussions for not following that. So that is the second thing that we can do. And the third, I think, is also very important. It is not only the government, the people, and by which I also include the private sector as a group and as entities, should get out of their entitlement and subsidy mindset and create globally or at least regionally sustainable and competitive businesses. I think while our private sector has admittedly made large gains, there is still there's some thinking. I'm not saying all. There is some thinking that that they need tax holidays, they need low wages, they need competition should be reduced. Now, all of those are not going to make them sustainable in the regional or the global sense. So we need to get out of that and really work hard so it's not only the government, the private sector and the people, population in general, by getting out of their sort of entitlement from cradle to grave entitlement mentality, they also have to contribute if the country is to go to the next stage of development.
Thank you, sir, for taking the time to answer realistically a number of pressing questions that loom over us during these trying times.
Thank you, Fazmina. It was a pleasure having been with you. Right.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.